Hello, everyone. Welcome to the September 2013 Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group. This is our live monthly study group, something I like to do because, well, gosh darn it, I like you. And you ask for it, and you send me all these questions. I almost feel compelled at this point. We have to have a study group. Sometimes during the summer, I'll tend not to do one, and you absolutely tell me that that's a really bad idea. So I'm committed to doing one of these a month, and how can I not? Because I've got everybody now telling me what information they would like to know about and things they'd like to do. In fact, if you'd like to see more about what we're doing here at Professor Messer, you can find us, of course, at professormesser.com/live every month. If you'd like to see when we're going to have these, you can go to our calendar, which is professormesser.com/calendar. And we are able to do these not only because of your support and watching these videos on YouTube, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for doing that. We also have people that take these offline. If you'd like to find out how you can buy a version to go offline, you can go to professormesser.com/download-network plus. And of course, following me on Twitter and YouTube also helps because I'm able to send you notices and information about when we go live and how that works. Now, I have quite a bit of content to go through. If you are joining us live, we have a live anniversary or live a show piece in the chat room. Steve's talking about the anniversary show. I don't know if it's a year anniversary. It's been about 2 years, hasn't it? So I've been churning these together. I don't even count them. You'll notice I don't have a number associated with the study groups. I just go with it. It's certainly been more than a year. So that's one of those nice things is we're able to do these. I'd love to do more. So hopefully we can work something like that out in the future. If you are watching us live, we have a live chat at the bottom of every page of professormesser.com. If you're watching this on the YouTube site, the YouTube has a chat and comments off to the side. I can't see those during the study group. I just don't have enough arms to be able and eyes to be able to see all of those things. So I am watching the live chat at the bottom of professormesser.com. I have also got a call-in line. So if you go to professormesser.com/live, you'd like to ask me a question directly, there's a phone number there. It is toll-free, and you're able to do, because it's toll-free, you can do that via Skype from anywhere in the world. So that's kind of a nice thing to have as well. Now, we have a lot of content to go through this month, but there was a number of questions I got this month that we covered last month. So let's talk about what those are. We've got an overview of what the exam topics are for Network Plus. What is the difference between an IPS and a stateful firewall? We talked about that in the last edition. Can you please explain the difference between connection-oriented and connection-less? Talked about TCP and UDP and how that works. How about some great practical applications to practice and reinforce things in Network Plus? We discussed RIP, the RIP protocol. What's the importance of studying Network Plus? And do I have to memorize the OSI model? And the quick answer was, yeah, you do. But I tell you all about what you need to memorize and much more. If you want to see the replays of this, you can go to the Professor Messer website. At the Network Plus video index page at the very bottom are the replays of all of the Network Plus study groups. And so there's also a lot you can view there and go back to the entire archives and listen and watch all of those. Now, as many of you know, I like to have this be a little more interactive, not only with phone calls, but I like to be able to ask you questions for people watching online. Maybe you don't want to call in, but I'd like to have you participate. And if you have a QR code reader on your mobile device, or you just want to open up a new tab on your browser, I have questions for you that we like to have. This question is, how long have you been studying for your Network Plus certification? This is a good test for you to go through to figure out the types of things you can do with these answers, these questions that I give you. We're going to have quiz questions later on in the live stream. So it's always nice to have this ready to go. So if you have a QR code reader or pop open a browser, go to vot.rs and put in the code 972984. That's vot.rs. Just remember that one. This particular question is question number 972984. And when you get there, you'll be able to vote on that, and we get to see this interactively. Now, for those of you on the live stream, there's about a 30 to 60 second delay, as YouTube is nice enough to retranspose all of these video streams and send them out for absolutely free. So it's kind of nice to be able to do that. And now you can start to see I get feedback from you. I get to see this in real time as you're voting, and you can see the things changing on the screen. So we usually get a nice mix of people who are watching the live stream, somewhere from less than 3 months, 3 to 6 months. I just finished studying for a certification, and I had to cram it in 3 weeks. So I was definitely less than 3 months for that one. I think the next one I'll probably take it a little bit easier than that. It's where you stop everything you're doing in your life, and every moment of the day you're studying and trying to get information into your brain. And I also have had situations where I've studied for a certification, and then it took over a year for me to finally take that certification because life gets in the way and things happen and you just don't have time to get that, or there's a compelling need to go back and get that certification. Maybe you'd like to change jobs. Maybe there's another opportunity. If you just had that certification and you'd be able to do that. So make sure that you are able and comfortable with voting on these. It's nice to have this voting available. In fact, we have a lot of people who are watching the live stream that have already said, oh yeah, 5 people said I've been doing this for over a year. And it would be interesting to hear some of those stories too. We do have some people that have called in on the line, and since they're waiting there on the line and we're taking your votes, well, let's just go to one of our first calls in the 904 area code. Hi, what's your name? Let's see if their microphone is working on the Skype. And remember, if you're listening to the live stream, you're going to be a number of seconds behind. So if you do call in, I'll try to get to you very quickly. We'll put the 904 area code on hold, and we'll go to 559 area code. Hi, are you there? Sounds like you're in a wind tunnel. And indeed, they certainly are. We're going to come back to our calls in a bit. We got a nice group of people that have told us 8 people less than 3 months. That's what we usually see on these particular streams is we have this less than 3 months, 3 to 6 months, somewhere 3 to 9 months, somewhere in there. It usually helps to have that particular view of the world. Now, I got a number of people asking me about the Network Plus certification this month. We're getting to about 2 years into the Network Plus certification. It was released in 2011. And CompTIA tends to release new versions about every 3 years. It doesn't have to be every 3 years, but that's generally what they try to do. And we just had this revamp of the A+. So I think that's why a lot of people are asking me, when is the Network Plus going to change? You have plenty of time. Don't worry about it. The latest version is the N10005. In that version, even 2 years ago, they added virtual networking. They added more information about the OSI model. They added security, a lot more security in this particular version. And they will, of course, have an overlap period. So at the point where they decide they are going to announce a new version is available, they give you a nice long ramp. In some cases, 9 months to a year is what they've done in the past, so that you can go ahead and take the existing exam. You don't have to now study for a new exam. They don't cut you off suddenly and force you to take the new version. There's an overlap period, so don't worry about it. You'll be fine. There is no N10006. To this point, CompTIA has not publicly announced that. I don't have any particular insight into what CompTIA is doing. I'm not a CompTIA member. I'm not an associate of theirs. I don't get to hear about what's going on the inside. I hear exactly what you hear. So if you hear of CompTIA announcing anything and you think that would be interesting, I'd love to hear about it. I can't watch those news feeds all day, every day. So it's nice when all of you can update me as well. Well, let's go through the questions that you have sent to me. And we're going to start the questions with some pretty interesting ones. I'm going to ask you something that you may not know the answer to, but we're going to learn how to do this. In fact, we're going to see if I was able to do it right. So how would you abbreviate this IPv6 address? This is a nice long address, FE80000000. Well, you can see it. I'm not going to spell it out on the screen, but how would you look at that address? And I've got options for you as to what those would be. So how would you abbreviate this address? Pull out your QR code readers, go to vot.rs 640666. It's a lot of 640666 because it's IPv6, of course. Now, if you look at this, there's a lot of zeros. There's things in the middle. This is one of the questions you may be asked on your Network Plus, is to be able to look at an IPv6 address and understand how to abbreviate it. So if you do that, there are some options you have available on the vot.rs. There's FE80::1000:0987. There's FE80::1000:987. There's FE8::1:987. You can see these options there's a lot of colons and zeros and FE8, and what are they? So you can go to that page and see what all the options are, and now start to figure out how these things are abbreviated. And that's a pretty important piece when you start changing around what the routers are doing, what the switches are doing. Some folks were asking about the QR code, so I'm going to pop open that QR code again so you can see that. This is, I think, a pretty useful thing to have also going forward. As I go around and visit my different folks that I know during the week, a lot of them are starting to not only be interested in IPv6, but there are some implementations of IPv6. Many of them are related to just people trying it out and seeing, is this going to work? There is an annual trial that people can participate in, and a lot of the large internet providers will participate as well. So you can get the Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world and the Twitters of the world running IPv6 for a day, and everybody does it for a day to be able to do that. So we've got 16 respondents. So what would the answer be? Let's see what the results are. 20 people have said, here's the answers. Let's see what we know about IPv6. So we've got a number of different people give us some options here of what's available. And we got everything. I got almost everybody, and nobody answered this one in the middle. But we certainly have folks that have said, what's this one right here? And it's this one right here. Or it's this one here. Or it's perhaps this one over here. So one of these is a pretty good abbreviation of this. And if I wrote it properly, I think I did for the most part, write the ones properly. And as you might imagine, the one that has 10 votes at the top is the one that is actually correct. That's FE80:0:0:0:1000:987. So why was it that way? Let's find out more about this interesting IPv6 type of thing. Why is that the case? So we want to be able to really understand what the rules are for abbreviating an IPv6 address. And you can see there's a good reason to abbreviate it. If that's a single IPv6 address, that's a big number. You can't even see the number because of my big head. Here we go. So that's a nice long hexadecimal number that we would have to somehow remember. It's actually much easier to work with IPv6 once you get into it and start working with it, especially if you're able to implement it in your environment. You have a lot of capabilities there to be able to make that happen. So let's go back and think about this question. It came from Matt, who said, how does IPv6 differ from IPv4? And let's step first through IP version 4. And there's really not a lot that is unusual about this because we've been using it for so long. I mean, this is a protocol that's been around for such a long period of time. We've almost become so accustomed to doing it to be able to have that layer 3 capability with those 4 octets, we call it. And we call it octets because, as you can see here, there are 8 bits in each one of these numbers. It's a number between 0 and 255. So there's 256 total numbers you can fit into an octet. All 8 of them, we call those bits. They're your bytes, they're octets. It's the same type of thing. It's the nomenclature we use. So a total IP version 4 address are these 4 separate groups of octets. Total, that's obviously 32 bits of data that we're able to use for addressing. This is allowing us a lot more options when we start working with our networks. And as you're probably aware, we're running short of those IPv4 addresses out on the internet. That's obviously a concern. It's one of the biggest reasons we want to move to IP version 6 so that we can do that. So we don't have to worry about running out of addresses. And of course, there's a lot of other capabilities within IP version 6 as well. Well, we just saw an IPv6 address, so it's a big one. So you can see lots of zeros inside of this. And you can see in this particular case, I've got a big address that's written down here. You've got these groups of zeros. Notice that you can use a double colon to take those groups of zeros and get rid of them. So if there's 1 or more groups, really 2 or more groups, you would use this particular piece. You can get rid of those long strings of zeros with 1 set of double colons. Now, keep in mind, you can only use that double colon 1 time. So on that question we talked about before, where some folks were answering this first option, FE80, notice there's 2 double colons in there. Don't do that. You can't do that. You can only use the double colon 1 time. no more than once. If you use it more than once, you've got an invalid address. So every time you see an option with double colon, you don't even have to read it or go through it or process it any differently. You can immediately discard that as being something that's invalid, which leaves you just these two options here. So let's talk about zeros. And the double colon was a great way to get rid of zeros, but there's another way to get rid of zeros as well. And we can get rid of leading zeros, zeros that come before the number. So if you look at a number 0001, well, if you get rid of the zeros, it's still the number 1. Now, in the case of the question we had before, I had a 1000 there. I can't get rid of those zeros. Those zeros aren't leading. Those are trailing zeros. If I got rid of the zeros, it would change this whole number from 1000 to 1. Those are not the same number. So that's why those stay there. In fact, here you can see I got rid of the trailing zeros, and I've got a 1 left. 1 is not 1000. I changed the number completely. We have to leave those zeros in there if they're trailing. Those do not go anywhere in that particular case. So those are the two big rules. It's only two things. Get rid of the leading zeros. And anytime there's a group of zeros together in those groupings, you can put a double colon in its place. Let's try one. Let's do one here. I've got an example of an IPv6 address. Here's another one with all of these bunches of zeros. This one really jumps out at you. If you were trying to figure out where would I start abbreviating some of these things? First step, get rid of any leading zeros. That's a good place to start. We can go in either direction. We have to do both. But if we get rid of leading zeros, we have something like this. So we're starting to get rid of a lot of the information that's there. That's already a lot better if we're to look at that address. But you can see in this case, I have 3 zeros in a row, 1, 2, 3, that are just sitting there. What if I was just able to get rid of those completely? Wouldn't that be nice if I was able to do that? So we can get rid of 2 groups of those with the double colons. And now this address turns into this. Look, I got rid of a whole chunk there. It's just completely gone. There's nothing happening there. So FE80::, and then I can skip that whole section. And now I've got the rest of the address that's there. And finally, if I just squish everything back together, there's the address. So it's nice. We had that big address at the top. We're able to get rid of a lot of extra information, and we have that address right there at the bottom. So let's see what we've learned. I have another question for you about abbreviating the address. Get your QR codes reader. Do not answer in the chat room. And here's your question. How would you abbreviate this IPv6 address? So use your QR code reader or go to vot.rs number 220834. to be able to answer this one. I got a lot of questions for you on this particular study group, don't I? While we're doing this, I'm going to try that 904 area code again. We'll see if the 904 person is there. Are you there, 904? Here's something. I might be muted. Maybe not. Do I hear myself talking? I sort of do. I hear that Skype convention that they have to do the echo cancellation, and we're just missing the echo cancellation piece in there. I'm going to give that person another second. They might be listening to the live stream. So as you're voting on the abbreviation, this is when you almost have to get a piece of paper and really write out exactly what it's going to be, or at least look through every single one of these answers that might be here to be able to work on these particular examples. Doesn't look like the 904 area code is there. That's okay. I'll put you back on hold. You'll be able to call in just a bit. Oh, I've got some people already answering before anybody else does. I'm going to hide this on this side. So now we're getting some responses in of what people think that, I've already forgotten what the answer is. So I'm going to have to go through the question myself and have a look at all of the answers and see if I can remember what the answer is. I think I have it. I think I've got it right. Well, I'll step through. I'll take you through my reasoning as we step through this and have you guess and understand to be able to work with this. It's one of those things that I do a lot of these during the day. It's been a crazy week because I did take my own certification test this week. It's been a little crazy. Why did I decide to do a study group when I had all these other things going on? Because that's how it works for me. So we've got a number of answers on here to go with. So let me go through my thought process, and then we'll see if I got this right. So we have this big long address that's here. 2000 0B00, bunch of zeros, 00A000002. So I stuck some leading zeros in here. So I can get rid of the leading zero here. So it's 2000 BB0. It's a bunch of zeros. Leading zeros here, I can get rid of those and just leave A0. And I can get rid of all these leading zeros and just have 2. Now we have these huge groups of zeros in the middle. There's an opportunity to use a double colon. So if I had to find an answer, it would be 2000 BB0 : A02. So let's see if there is an answer down here for that. So 2000 BB0 : A02. I'm thinking it's this first one right here. Now let's look at the other examples though and see if we can look at one and get rid of some options. So 2000 0BB, I got rid of a trailing zero. That can't be right. There's a 2. Well, again, I got rid of trailing zeros. Before we even look at the rest of it, I can throw that out. So I know that's not the case. Again, there's a 2 by itself. And indeed got rid of the trailing zeros and the BB as well. That one's completely wrong. We don't even have to look at the rest of that. 2000 BB, I got rid of the 0 on the front and the end. That one's not going to be correct either. So let's see how everyone else did. Let's look at the results. And the results are... boom. Oh, now we got it. Look how great we were from the first question we did all the way through to this question. So this is fantastic. This is a nice progression. It's nice to see that in the study group. We're able to go immediately and look at those pieces and learn something from what we're doing there. Well, I have another question that came in. I'm going to very quickly, just for fun, go back to the 904. I keep trying the 904 person. Are you there, 904? Sounds like someone who's in my neck of the woods. One thing you can do is when you are calling in, that one sounds like it is working, but make sure you listen in on the stream. I know it won't be synced up to what you were seeing on the screen, but make sure you sync up with that. Well, I've got some questions also from Naveen, who sent in, what's the difference between a MAC and an IP address? And how are these used in computer networks? What's up with that? That's a pretty good question, because we talk about things like switches and routers. One of the questions I got this month was, what's the difference between a switch and a router? What should I think about? What should I worry about when switches and routers? And why do switches look at some things, the MAC address? Why do routers look at IP addresses? What's up with that? And it's all based on how the packet of data is put inside of the frame. How the segment is put inside of the packet is put inside of the frame. So if we looked at an Ethernet frame, it looks like this, the one on the bottom. But how did we get all of this put together? If you were to grab a protocol analyzer, you download Wireshark. And if you're working on your Network Plus, I highly recommend that you download Wireshark at wireshark.org and start capturing packets. You'll have no idea what's going on. That's okay. It's how it's supposed to work. There's plenty of tutorials out there. You can grab Laura Chappell's book and read through it, which is a brand new book. It's excellent. She sent me a copy. It's amazing what she's able to do with Wireshark and be able to understand what's going on. Now, we start up here at the top. Let's say you're going to the Professor Messer website. You're pulling down information about what's there. The first thing that happens is that data is sent to you. And you can see we can fit a maximum on a normal Ethernet network, a maximum of 1,460 bytes inside of that segment of data. Now, of course, when you're pulling down a website, especially things like graphics and pictures, they're much bigger than 1,460 bytes. So behind the scenes, TCP is splitting those up into smaller chunks. So what we're really looking at here is a piece of that picture that's coming down the line in a single frame. Now, to get to us, for TCP to work, it has to also attach its own information to the front of that. It can't just send, here's some picture data. Where'd this come from? What type of data? I don't even understand what happened here. Well, TCP says, that's okay. I'm going to stick my own information on the front. It's got synchronization information. I know exactly the sequence number that's going back and forth. We know when anybody is missing data. TCP is able to keep track of all of those things for us. Well, that's great, but now it has to actually go to you. Now, everybody on the internet has an IP address. So the IP layer says, well, we're going to stick an IP address right on the front so I can deliver this TCP data to you. So if you look at the Ethernet frame in your Wireshark, you'll see there's an IP address, a source address, and a destination address. So we're able to see exactly where that data is going. Now, on your local network, you have a switch, you have something that's getting that data to your router and out to the internet, that switch doesn't look at IP addresses. It only looks at MAC addresses. So that layer 2 functionality inside of your computer says, before I can send this out, I've got to stick a MAC address on it, and it puts a MAC address, a data link control header, onto the front of this. And in the case of Ethernet, it's a MAC address. In other networking technologies, it might be a different kind of address on that. So we've got the DLC header, and it also puts something called a frame check sequence on the end, so that when it gets to you, you can do a checksum of the information to make sure there wasn't any corruption anywhere along the way. Now, that's why whenever we start talking about routing and switching and how different they are, that's because the switches are the first one to get this big frame right here that's got that MAC address header right on the front of it. And it now takes the entire frame and sends it to where it needs to go based on the destination MAC address that's in that header. And when your router receives this, maybe your workstation and your switch have realized this needs to go to the router, we're sending it out to the router. And your switch says, oh, you're going to the router's MAC address, I'm sending it to the router. The router rips off this MAC address information. Just, oh, I don't need that. I'm not a switch. It's already gotten to me. Let's rip off that MAC address, and let's see where this is really going. Switches work at layer 2. Routers work at this layer 3 IP address. So the router looks into the IP address. We've gotten rid of the MAC address. Didn't need him. Let's see where you're really going. Oh, you're going to 8.8.8.8. You're going to Google. I need to send you there. Let me look through my routing table. Okay, in my routing table, I can see that. If I need to go to the internet, go that way. Off you go. The router doesn't even know how you're getting there at that point. The router's just a step along the way that only knows as far as the next hop. And it says, okay, you're going there. And off you go. And when before it sends it, it says, you're going to need a MAC address of the next hop. Let me stick a new MAC address and send it on its way. And the whole process repeats over and over and over until it gets to the other side. Quite a process to go through that layer 2, layer 3, and crunch all of those things together and go step by step by step. Then we need an overview of that process for the Network Plus certification. We don't have to go into a lot of excruciating detail about the things that are inside of the headers themselves. You don't have to map out the entire TCP header. But if you go to Wireshark and you capture some data and you look at any TCP header that you happen to have captured with that data, you'll see all of the fields inside of that TCP information. You can cross-reference that with a Wikipedia that shows you a block diagram of the TCP header, and you can start to see oh, it all matches up. From a binary perspective, from a functional structural perspective, everybody's TCP header has the exact same format. That's the beauty of the standards. That's why whenever you're capturing data, whether you're capturing it on a network, on your local network, it's at a large enterprise, it's somewhere across the world, all of the data looks exactly the same. That's the great part about those standards. We have another message that came in, question that came in from Paul. Before we go to that, I'm going to switch off really quick because we did have a call come in. In the meantime, this is the 559 area code. Let's see if you're there. 559, are you there?
Yes.
Hello. And what's your name?
My name is Stan.
Hey, how are you? Nice to see you. Nice to hear from you. What question can we answer for you today?
Basically, just I'm still studying for the Network Plus.
Great.
I don't really have any questions, but right now I've been actually following and subscribing to your channel for a while. I just recently got my A plus, and that's kind of what I'm going towards, either Network Plus or the CCENT.
So in your case, and how long have you been studying for the Network Plus certification?
I was still in my classes and everything, and I haven't really studied too much because I recently just got my A plus. So I've been going through, like right now, we're going through the switches and everything, like basically frame tagging, trunking, and stuff like that for switches.
Oh, good. We're going to have a question about trunking later on in the study group. Now, you just finished the A+. I would imagine there's other people watching this that have also just finished their A+. You've had a chance to kind of look through the Network Plus requirements. What do you think is the biggest difference between those two certifications? Or what are you finding as the biggest difference?
As of right now, I guess I can't really say.
Because you're just getting into it. You're just getting into the routing and the switching aspect of it right now, right?
Yeah. I know the A plus is just more geared towards like computer management, basically, in an enterprise level. But
when people are
I'm
talking to
looking
me about
for
the
a
Network Plus, they often have a direction, a goal of what they're trying to do. And it sounded in your case, you're wanting to do maybe the routing and switching, or at least the networking side of things in the future. Does that sound right?
Correct. I'm actually looking towards like the actual wireless side to the actual network. So I want to actually kind of get more experience in actual wireless networking and the protocols within that. So because I know it's not too much different from what Network Plus has, but there is, I know, another certification for that. But I know that the Network Plus is going to help me know the protocols and everything. I'm not familiar with BGP so much as I am with like EIRG or EIGRP and stuff.
Well, you're actually not alone in that regard. BGP, obviously, one of these big protocols people use to connect to the internet. It's not one a lot of people work with all day, every day, unless you're a service provider, where that's one of the major things you're working on. But it's still, as an end user, always nice to have that. So you're already thinking, I need to know about OSPF, EIGRP. You're going to need to know about BGP. And one of the questions, you've already touched on one of the questions that have come up that we're going to talk about before we're done today. I will hit on trunking and VLANs. And there's also a question that came up where somebody wanted to say, what is the difference now between Network Plus and the CCENT? And I'm going to specifically discuss how that applies, especially to the ICND1, which has now been revamped. This would probably be your last day to take it before it goes to that new version. So I'll talk about that as well before we're done. Thanks for calling. I appreciate it, and good luck with your studies.
Thank you.
You know, one of the things that that come up all the time is the next step. So later on in the study group, I'm going to talk about the next step and what we're able to do along those lines. Let's go to our next question from Paul, which was troubleshooting network tools. Then whenever you get all of those things together, those network tool pieces, you've got all these things available to you. And not just the physical network tools, but you also have network tools as they are associated on the command line. And this is one of those things you run into quite a bit when you're working at the command line. In fact, I should probably bring up a session on my screen. I've got a device I can use to bring up a view of the world. So let's get some of that running while we're going through this. There's certain problems you run into. In fact, we were in the chat room this week where somebody said, I was having a problem talking to a device across a wide area network. And my problems associated with that were based on me not being able to access it with the name of the device. I could get to it with an IP address, but I could not get to it with a name. And so there's certain things you check for from a DNS perspective, and it would not be unusual on your Network Plus certification. It would not be unusual if they asked you during the performance-based questions, perform a DNS lookup or check the DNS configuration for this particular site. So now that I've somehow gotten that out of my mind, let's get into a session. Let me bring up just a single view so you're not having to deal with this. I'm going to bring up a command line in my Windows view so you can get a feel for what I'm looking at here. Let's just get a big screen of it. Here we go. I don't even know if this particular machine is networked. So let's say somebody is having a problem getting to ProfessorMesser.com. What would you do? Well, for the Network Plus certification, there are a lot of different commands that you could do out in the world. The one for Network Plus you need to know is NS lookup. And the simple syntax for NS lookup is to perform an NS lookup and then the name of the device, the fully qualified domain name of the device. You could also do IP addresses as well. But in this case, we're worried about getting to ProfessorMesser.com. And if we perform an NS lookup, a lot of things suddenly happen. So you not only have to know how to do this command, you may be asked a question relating to the results. So it may say to you, when you perform the NS lookup, what name server was accessed to be able to provide this information? And in my particular configuration here, I'm using Google's name server. You can see it's Google's public-dns-a.google.com. That's the exact name that I'm using. They're probably using a round robin, so wherever you happen to be in the world or wherever you happen to connect, you might get a different one on your screen, but the IP address will probably always be the same for Google because they have a couple of IP addresses you could use, and this one is using address 8.8.8.8. So what NSLookup is doing is going out to that Google name server and saying, I'm looking for this name, www.professormesser.com. Where is that? And we get an answer from the Google name server, and it's a non-authoritative answer, which means that this particular server is not the actual name server. I got this from somebody else. But still, you can bet that it's going to be pretty good. It probably came from the authoritative server that I use for my name services. So indeed, ProfessorMesser.com, which has an alias to www.professormesser.com. In my world, the way I've configured my name server, they're exactly the same thing. And here are the two. I have two addresses you could hit. You could hit 108, 162, 200, 232, or 141, 101, 127, 231. So there's really two places you can go. I've got a number of different redundancies and changes built into the front end of my server. That way, if one of these is not available, there's still another server people can go to access what's happening on my side. I've got a lot of things going on my web server. There's multiple load balancers, proxies, multiple servers, database servers. There's a lot of things going on there. I could do another stream just on how everything is laid out on the Professor Messer website. When you do an NSLookup to a server, you may only get one of these. You may get a bunch of them. It just depends on how the person who's managing the server is using that. So if you're trying to troubleshoot those DNS issues, you may absolutely be asked about that piece of it. In fact, the folks in the chat room are going, hey, that's a Cloudflare address. Yep, I use Cloudflare as a reverse proxy. You're actually hitting Cloudflare first. It's proxying information. If it doesn't have to go to the Professor Messer website to get my web server information, it caches it locally. It just gives it to you. So you immediately get a much faster response instead of going all the way back to my web server. I've got redundancy built into this. A lot of nice things associating with those pieces. In fact, you may see different addresses pop up because there's Cloudflare front ends anywhere in the world. So you might get a completely different group of addresses. Kind of nice to have that there as well. There's also situations you'll run into from a troubleshooting perspective. Before we get into a lot of those, I'm gonna take a breath. We've got some calls that have come in. So let's go to the call from this one happens to be an unlisted number. I have a feeling it's a Skype number from somewhere. Are you there? This is an area code that doesn't come up. So we see if there's anybody on the line. Are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Yes, you are there. Hi, what's your name?
This is M.A. Graham.
Oh,
I was on your A+ last week.
Yep, and I saw you in the chat room here this week. Thank you for joining.
Yes. Actually, my 801 is this Tuesday,
okay.
And my 802 is a week later.
So you're not only getting the A+ taken care of, you're learning sort of the network side now that you'll be able to help hopefully apply back to the A+ later on the week.
Well, I already have a voucher for Network Plus. I just haven't scheduled it yet.
You're shotgunning all of them then.
I'm going for the hat trick.
Why not? Why not? What question do you have today?
Do you find that the industry is leading away from managed gear as opposed to auto-managed gear? One of the reasons why I like Network Plus is that it's not manufacturer-centric as like CCNA or CCNP are, where you have to learn a specific manufacturer's gear and you have to do a lot of manual intervention. Do you find that I understand that previously large corporations benefited from the managed aspects of it since they could do what they want. But isn't it easier just to use auto-managed or non-managed gear these days?
So are you specifically referring to configurations that an organization is managing themselves, or you're referring to things like switches that have built-in management or switches that are unmanaged devices?
Switches and routers, both that require a lot of personal management by, a network professional, like Cisco routers, Cisco switches, as opposed to other switches that you can just if you wanted to just leave them to manage themselves.
Yeah, there is a part of that I think most people, when they're looking at especially switching and routing, and you've obviously looked forward into sort of the Cisco side of things, or Juniper or HP or whatever switching or routing manufacturer there is, I would think, and from what I've seen going around, anytime you see an unmanaged switch, one that, if we define these, a managed switch is one that has additional capabilities inside of it. Generally, a managed switch allows you to get statistics about how the device is running, and you're able to also use more advanced features like carving out VLANs inside of that. On any medium to large size organization, or even these days small organizations, and I mean even in my studio, right here, I have a switch that's down here to my left that is a managed switch, and it's just me. I'm the only employee that's in here, but I keep it managed because I want to split things out into separate VLANs. I need some additional capabilities for statistics. So it's very unusual to see a non-managed device being used in even a small business. Almost everybody's doing this. The real challenge, and I think you've hit on it, is configuring and managing switches, especially when you start getting into large switches. There's automatic VLAN configuration. There's trunking and configurations that have to be set up. And when you get into routing, there's dynamic routing protocols and multiple locations, and the configurations of the devices themselves can be incredibly complex, especially when you get into IPsec tunnels and encryption and SSL VPN connectivity. There's a lot of moving parts. What a lot of organizations then, they make a decision. They get to decide, do we want to have people in-house that are going to be managing these devices for us? Or are we going to hire an IT team to be able to do this? And in many organizations, that's exactly what they do. In some organizations, though, when you see this on the extremely large scale, if it's a big company, they might decide, we're an insurance company, and we don't want to be in the IT business. What we're going to do is give all of the money we would normally pay to an in-house IT group. We're going to give that to a third party and have the third party manage the routers and the switches and everything else. We don't have the employees. We don't have people taking up space in our building. We don't have to worry about IT because we're an insurance company, and we're just going to outsource all of those pieces. So it really depends on the context.
And you know what? I'm counting on that because that is my business. I am an IT consultant, but it's just a matter of working up to it.
It's pluses and minuses. The disadvantage you have when people start outsourcing is now they have less control over the quality, the end quality. It's more of a contractual obligation to the end quality of the product itself. But I think we're starting to see a lot more of the management side as more people put things in the cloud, and the entire Professor Messer infrastructure is one that I don't manage. I pay different people to be able to watch my servers. If there's a problem, they go in and correct it. If I need something installed, they install it for me. I've got a command line up right now on my server. I don't completely disconnect myself from it. I like to go through the logs. I like to see the information on it myself. But I'm wanting to make more videos for you. I don't want to have to be managing these servers. And as you've already heard, it's a relatively involved grouping of servers to be able to make this happen. I'm going to let them take care of it. So hopefully I can contribute to your future success by giving some other person my money to make sure all of those things will work for me.
Perfect.
I thank you for calling.
Thank you so much. I'll actually be down your way in another couple of 3 weeks because I go diving in Wakulla County.
Okay. So
hopefully we can meet at Hammerknockers or something for some risk.
Exactly. So this is right down the road, relatively speaking. So let me know when you're in town. Thanks for being in the chat room, watching the study groups, and thanks for calling in today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bye now.
One of the nice parts about that infrastructure piece of it is you notice that you could either do it in-house or you could do it somewhere else, but there's always going to be somebody doing it. So if you're working towards a career at this, really doesn't matter because somebody's got to take care of it. There's plenty of jobs out there for people to be able to take care of that. Some of the questions I sometimes get is, do you think that this whole cloud thing is going to be a problem for us? Oh, no. The cloud thing is awesome. This is great. There's more people going to be needing more access and more things. We're simply moving where the boxes are and how they're managed. We still have to make sure that all of those things are happening. Let's go through another question that I have for you. Since we're talking about troubleshooting, the question I have is specific to troubleshooting a remote device. So get your things ready, get your remote devices ready, and get your QR code readers, because the question I have for you is, what troubleshooting utility provides a secure terminal session to a remote device? You can vote at vot.rs. Number 761351 is the number of the question. And I'm saying this as, of course, on my screen, I don't have it up myself. So let me at the same time go to vot.rs and choose the question to say, what troubleshooting utility provides a secure terminal session to a remote device? And that's vot.rs 761351. Your options are Telnet, Ping, Traceroute, Netstat, SSH. Telnet, Ping, Traceroute, Netstat, SSH. I think I crammed all of the utilities in there. So you're going to have to know what every one of those utilities does and how it works to be able to make that happen. That's one of those times when you start having to take different options and get rid of them. Well, it can't be that one. It can't be that one. It can't be that one. We can get all the way down to choosing a particular piece. And while we're doing that in the chat room, they're asking me about the in the cloud piece. The benefits I get are tremendous. I'm able to, at an instant, because I'm not only running things in the cloud, I'm running it in a virtual infrastructure. So at any time, I can take a VHD of a virtual hard drive of an existing web server or database server or front end that I have, and I can just copy it, send it off over here. So it doesn't disrupt the normal day-to-day on my website. And now that I've copied it over, I can perform testing on that device. I can make changes and see what type of reaction I get from those changes. I am able to do a lot of different things with that piece. So really allows me amazing functionality that I'm able to keep everything up and running for you. So you can watch videos, you can get to the information you need, and then I can do the testing I need so I can implement new things on my site and make sure there's not going to be a problem when I do that. So let's go to this question that we have about what is the troubleshooting utility that would allow us to have a secure terminal session to a remote device. Now, there's an interesting word in here. You have to really read these things, because the question asked not just for a terminal session, but it asked for a secure terminal session. So it would be nice to have a look at that as well. Let's see what my options are. You've had 31 respondents. Let's see what people have responded. We have Telnet, Ping, Traceroute, Netstat, and SSH. I really didn't fool very many people on that one. This is good. You're able to absolutely get a feel for that. Now, it's not Telnet, and I bet the people that answered Telnet missed that word that's up here, secure. A secure terminal session. Telnet sends everything through the network in the clear. It's not encrypted at all. There is no encryption with Telnet. If you were typing in and connecting to a switch or a router on Telnet, and you were putting in your username and your password, and I had a Wireshark on that connection, maybe you're wireless, maybe I caught it in the middle of the connection, I can see the words you are typing in. I can see your username. I can see your password. You will be hard-pressed to find a router or a switch, relatively speaking. I guess statistically speaking, it's hard to find a router or switch that has Telnet configuration built in. However, you can bet on the internet that there are many devices that are wide open and susceptible to somebody connecting with default credentials. There's a study that was done recently. I should pull that up. I'll tweet it out or Facebook it later today. So we'll mention that where there was a study recently done where a guy went out and scanned all of these devices and found these infrastructure devices that were effectively wide open because they were using the default username, password, and maybe even using it over Telnet as well. Ping obviously is something that checks to see if a device is available. It's not a terminal session. SSH is the correct answer for the terminal session. So very good to have something like that available whenever we're accessing these devices, especially over the network, because we'd like to keep them safe as well. Now, as you probably saw, I had a question up from Beacom that said, or Bekim, that said, what's a good way to do labs at home on a tight budget? Do I have to build a network at home? And for Network Plus, it would be nice if I had a device that I could set up and I could ping to a router or switch, or I could make changes to the wireless and see what would happen, or I would be able to go into a configuration device and change the IP addresses and subnet masks. But sometimes we don't have all of those resources available. So I partnered with my friends at Freestyle, GTS Learning's Freestyle product, to be able to give us some labs that we can run remotely. These are labs that you can just pop up in a browser and connect to them. They're always available. I should, in fact, show you this. It's quite remarkable. It's like having all of these different devices on your computer and accessing them virtually through the network. I just mentioned how all my servers are out in the cloud somewhere. This is an easy way to go through and have effectively your entire lab in the cloud. And it's done all through Freestyle at GTS Learning. I've just logged into my account. Let's see if I have my courses here and available. Here's the Network Plus course. I'll zoom in on some of this so those of you who are watching won't have your eyeball problems. But this is the front end. I'm now in the lab. I've now just gained access to the laboratory, and there's a lot of configuration here to look at. Let's go through, for instance, a test. Let's scroll down. ARP and packet analysis. Since we've been talking about packet analysis, I want to investigate the ARP cache table, use Wireshark, capture packets, ARP problems, and a summary. That hasn't been started yet. Or it has been started. I think I did one. I used this particular course in a previous study group. So it's going to take the size of my screen and say, here's the lab. So already there's a domain controller, a server, a router, and a web server already set up with all the right IP addressing. I don't have to configure anything on my site. And I can go to each of these devices like my server, and I can power it on. In fact, I'm going to use their new HTML5 remote access to this device. I'm not even going to use the Java remote desktop. So I can go to each one of these devices and just power it on. Power on my gateway, power on my router, power on my web server. That's it. I just turned on everything in my lab. I went around all the boxes and I clicked the power button, and they've started up and they've started booting up in the background. Once they are available, you can see there's these little marks next to them that gives me the status of these devices. So I can see which ones are booting up. They're orange. I can see if they're powered off. There's no light at all. And once they are ready and available, they turn green. So each lab is already predefined. I don't have to build the server. I don't have to install Windows. I don't have to figure out how to get the domain controller working. I don't have to figure out the IP addressing. I don't have to figure out how the router is configured. All I have to do is go to this view, and if I want to be able to see pieces of it, I can simply view that connection, and now it's started up. There's my route. This web RTP, just that fast. That's a really fast remote desktop. So now I can go into the server manager, and it's already booted up. I can make changes. Here's his IP addressing, the internet side of things. What is it using? That's my router. In this case, it's using this Windows device to route all of that traffic back and forth. These other devices are still booting up, but now I can go out to that server just on the separate tab and do whatever I want to do with it. What a amazing flexibility I have to be able to do that. Now, it's nice to have that piece available, but of course, it has to be at a good price as well. So I partnered with my folks at GTS Learning to really drop the price down to $99. If you'd like to just try it out, you don't have to buy it. You could try their lab for an hour. I think it's an hour long. You get a trial of it. Go out to professormesser.com/netlabs. And if you're someone who doesn't want to set those things up in your lab, you don't have time to set it up, you just don't have the resources available, that might be a great option for you. Well, we have another question that came in. Get your QR codes reader. No answering in the chat room. The question that we have, and this fits perfectly with the call that we got earlier from Fan, which is, what's a VLAN? Go to VOT.rs and you yourself can answer the question of what in the world is a VLAN. You go to VOT.rs. The number is 612950. What is a VLAN? Well, if you find out at 612950. So a lot of interesting information that we want to go through with VLANs. This is an important consideration for the Network Plus. Obviously, this is something that you will run into in even the smallest environment. I mentioned in my environment, I don't have the biggest network in the world, but I do have a need for VLANs. So what would it be here? Because I've got a lot of data. I've got a lot of different kinds of information all over the place. I've got a lot going on here. So what type of a piece of information would we want to know about? So the options that you have available are, is it the partitioning of a layer 2 network? Is it an encrypted tunnel between locations? Is it a fiber-based high-speed network, or is it a network redundancy protocol? It's a lot of different options there. Out at VOT.rs 612950. One of the things that that you'll run into, not just with Network Plus, but probably the next step, if you go to another network-related certification, VLANs will absolutely be on it. Every time I walk into an environment, I go to these large companies every week. These large companies have many VLANs that they have configured inside, especially remote sites in the core, in different application areas. VLANs everywhere. So the management and consideration of those VLANs becomes pretty important to be able to do that. Let's have a look at some of the answers. We have some people that have responded. So let's see what the folks have sent in for the responses. And we've got a mix of different things. VLAN, we had 17 people say it's the partitioning of a layer 2 network, 10 people said an encrypted tunnel, and 2 people said a network redundancy protocol. Or VLAN stands for virtual LAN, a virtual local area network. It is not a fiber-based high-speed network, although VLANs can certainly run over high-speed fiber networks. But that's not what a VLAN is. It's not a network redundancy protocol. There's a lot of network redundancy protocols out there. This is not what VLAN does. A lot of people said an encrypted tunnel between locations, but no, there is different protocols like IPsec, like SSL, that provides remote access encrypted tunnels between locations. In this case, that is not a VLAN. A VLAN is the partitioning of a layer 2 network. So when you start getting into the partitioning and separating out the network into other pieces, you're going to want to use that with a VLAN. So the question that is going to be really appropriate is the one that came from Gabriel that said, what in the world's a VLAN? And why would you use it? Well, it is a way that you can separate out your network. This really is a challenge in a lot of environments. We're separating it out for many different reasons. You might be separating it out because it's easier to keep a small number of people into what we call these broadcast domains. And these broadcast domains, we can just keep a small group there. But generally, VLANs have more of a functional use. And we might have a big campus environment. And we might have people in the accounting department. But those people in the accounting department may be located in different buildings. But we want everyone in the accounting department to all have local access to their local resources. It might be a printer, and maybe there's a perfect reason right there. You don't want your accounting printouts to be coming out and shipping and receiving. You want them only to come out on a printer that's in a safe accounting area. There's a very good example for environments where security is very tight, a perfect reason to separate out the VLANs. But when you have people in different buildings, they're connected to different switches. How do you tie them all together? You tie them all together with VLANs, and generally you're setting up your switch to separate them out, and your routers will route between the different VLANs. This is something that also is integrated generally into a network access control functionality. Let's say you go to a conference room and you plug in. A lot of environments have a back-end process that recognizes that someone's plugged in a device into a conference room, but they're not going to give you access to the network. That would not make sense at all. That's not secure. So instead, you're prompted for a username and a password. So it checks your username and password and says, oh, you happen to be James, you're in the accounting department. I'm going to grant you access in this conference room now that you've given me the appropriate credentials. And I'm going to put this conference room interface on the accounting VLAN with all of your other compadres and your printers and servers and all of your other resources automatically. That's what network access control is all about. If I didn't have the proper credentials, I would not gain access into that part of the network. So here's the challenge, though, is if I'm on one of these switches, there's probably many VLANs in there. There's an accounting department. There's a shipping and receiving. There is a marketing. There is, and maybe you're at a school where there's a student network, there's an administrator network. You've got all these different networks and VLANs that can be set up. So you have to have a way to send information between switches, but still keep the VLAN straight. And we do that through something called trunks. And that's why whenever you look at this picture, this comes directly from the VLAN video for Network Plus, is we have all of these devices. Normally, in the best possible world, we just stick all the accounting people in one room. There you go. We wouldn't have to segment you out. You're all geographically in the same place. But no, that's not the case. They're always in different buildings. And then now, of course, you're remote. You're at home. You're coming in through wireless. You can be moving all over the place all the time. So your people are in all kinds of different places. So you can see here, there's a green VLAN, a red VLAN, and a blue VLAN. VLANs are usually numbered, but for the purpose of this visual feedback, everybody is sharing these colors are on the same VLAN. So the way that we keep track of this is we set up these trunks between these switches so that everybody who's on the green VLAN can all talk to each other. And really, we're telling the switch, take this connection, make it a trunked connection, and just send VLAN information. We'll put it into the trunk with a special tag that says what VLAN this traffic is in. When he gets to the other side, we'll see the tag, we'll pull the tag off, and we'll send it off to the appropriate place. Keeps things separated, more secure, keeps your resources where they're supposed to be. Certainly useful to have that there. Okay, we've now gotten to the part of the study group where I have scheduled an hour, and I'm now going to go horribly over that time frame. But that's okay. We still have the call-in lines are still open. We're going to keep going. So I'll of course have this in the replay as well, but I got a number of questions this month about the exam itself. So I wanted to go through a few of those. One of the questions was, with my A+ completed, how long does one expect to be ready to pass the Network Plus? Question from David. And it really just depends. You get a nice beginning piece of information about networking on the A+. So it gives you just a little taste of it. But as you get into the Network Plus, you'll see that the Network Plus requirements are pretty broad. There's a lot that's being asked of you across many different domains. And a lot of it is memorization of brand new protocols. If you've worked with networking in the past, you may pick up on these very easily. If you're not somebody who's done a lot of networking, however, you may find that it takes a while to memorize these pieces. It's harder to understand the context because you have not used it in an environment. Sometimes the labs will help you out and keep going with those types of things. But always keep in mind that you should really look at the exam objectives, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, so that you can really get a grasp of exactly what you need to know before you walk into the exam. I think that's the biggest challenge everybody has, is that you're never quite certain when you should be taking that exam. Should I go, okay, now, do I know enough now to pass? Should I wait and study another week? How do I get some feedback? We'll talk about that in just a moment as well. So one of the questions that came in from Christopher is really along the same lines, which is, how do I know then what I should be studying? There's a lot of information that I'm seeing online in my videos. Where should I really be going to get this study information, and how do I really know? And for those of you that have watched these every month, it's really important to know what's in the exam, and the best way to do it is with the exam objectives. The exam objectives have everything inside of it. So if you go out to the CompTIA website and you look at what's there, if you go right to the certification tab, and it's, this site may change, so look for the certification area. I'm most interested now in the Network Plus settings. So I'm going to choose Network Plus on my screen. And it brings up the options for the Network Plus, tells you all about the N10005. And right here, I love this now, right here in the middle of the screen, view exam objectives, view sample questions. The two biggest questions I get every week to my website is, where are the objectives? And do you have any sample questions? They're right here. So let's view some exam objectives. I'm going to put in my name and my information with my email that I want to use for this particular piece. And you also have to put your country in. But if you have those pieces there, you'll also be able at that point to choose what certifications you would like to get. So at this point, you could choose all of them if you wanted to. Network Plus will automatically be checked for you. So let's just choose Get Exam Objectives. And it gives you a big list. It even shows you some of the older exam objectives, and that's okay. I mean, there are some places throughout the world that still take older objectives, even if the newer ones are there, or they leave them there so that you have a reference. If you've already studied for the N10004 and you wanted to know the difference, you might want to download both of them. Now, in our case, the latest is the N10005, so let's select that one, and it pulls up the list of objectives, and it tells you exactly what you need to know. There are 5 domains: network concepts, installation and configuration, media and topologies, management, and security. Great. But this makes a great checklist because CompTIA does a lot more than many organizations do. They give you a step-by-step breakdown of everything you need to know in each one of those objectives. So there was one up here on network security. Let's say, well, what do they ask me about network security? Well, let's scroll through the list down to the 5th domain. And we keep scrolling. We keep scrolling. Scroll. We're already on page 6. Here we are, page 7, page 8. Look at all of the detail on here. This is a fantastic checklist. Okay, section 4, finally, domain 5, network security. Given a scenario, implement appropriate wireless security measures. Explain the methods of network access security. Well, I just told you about network access security. Look at all these tunneling and encryption protocols you need to know. All the remote site protocols that you need to know. There's a huge chunk right there that you're going to spend some time trying to figure out what all the differences are between those. And that's why when I make my videos, you'll notice the videos are numbered with exactly the same numbers that are on here. So if you go to this list and go, I don't really know the remote access protocols that well, that's okay. There's a 5.2 video listed in the list called remote access protocols. So you can go through all of those pieces. This makes a great checklist. This really gives you a nice way to break out and see everything you need to know. So if you're ever wondering, and it's really kind of disappointing sometimes, it crushes me when people come to the website and say, I just found your website, but I took my Network Plus or my A Plus and I didn't do well. And they asked me things I wasn't expecting. And they probably asked things they weren't expecting. And I asked, did you download the objectives? What are those? I didn't even know they existed. So we were able to reset and grab the objectives, use those as a checklist, and then maybe use some other resources. The Freestyle also has an option that you could add on from GTS Learning, some sample exams. Maybe we use some of those to give us some feedback of what's there. A lot of good information available to pull from the objectives. I use it every time I take a certification exam. I go to the manufacturer, I download the objectives, I look at what the options are available to me and be able to see what's there. Pretty nice to have that. Now, along those lines, we had a call that came in that talked about someone who's doing Network Plus, and they're looking later on to do other things. So there are next steps you're probably going to want to go to. One of the things that I do is I think Network Plus is a good jumping off point. It gives you the basics of what you need. And up until really today, up until next week, the Cisco certification for the Enterprise Network Technician, I think that's what CCNT is, that's their entry-level certification. Well, they've now changed their entire structure. You now have to have your CCENT to be able to really go to the next step of any of the other Cisco certifications. And up until this point, if you looked at the exam objectives for Network Plus and you looked at the ones for the CCENT, they were pretty close to each other. Really, Cisco was also using the CCENT as that introduction to networking. But now they've completely restructured it. So if you've watched an old Network Plus study group, I've said these are about the same. Well, now erase all of that. They're now not about the same at all. Now there is extensive dynamic routing inside the CCENT. There's extensive information you need to know about configurations inside of wide area networks. There are things you need to know about detailed configuration settings inside of a Cisco router. So no longer are these things really that close to each other. But this actually works pretty well. If you're taking your Network Plus, it is a fantastic jumping off point because the first 25%, 35% of that CCENT deals with a number of topics that you dealt with in Network Plus. So you don't have to start from the very beginning. What is ARP? Well, I already got it. It's in Network Plus. How does a switch work? What is a trunk? What's a VLAN? You already have that piece. The CCENT is going to say, okay, let's configure a VLAN. Let's get on this particular device, this switch or this router, and configure routing. Let's set up OSPF. Let's configure EIGRP. Let's do all of those pieces. That's well beyond the scope of Network Plus. So a lot of detail. Up until this point, they were pretty congruent, but now very, very different in those pieces and what's asked of you for that. So a lot of detail you'll need to know. The CCNT goes well beyond the specifics. The Network Plus is your introduction to CCENT. And then, of course, from there, much more detailed exams coming on the Cisco side. And the same thing really applies to Juniper, and the same thing applies to HP, and the same thing applies to any of the switch and routing manufacturers that are out there. A lot of detail you'll need to know. And I think the Network Plus is a good starting point, regardless of what you want to do. If you're going into database management, if you're going into data center configurations and management, if you're going into server management, if you're going into security, you need this foundation of network information. So very, very useful to have those pieces available and be able to work with them. So we've got a few more minutes. I wanted to quickly remind you before we close up shop. Nobody else on the phone line, so checking those pieces. We have a lot of things going on here. You can always keep track of the videos, especially as I put the replay of this one out, and all of my other videos you can find on YouTube. And if you ever want to know how can I help the Professor Messer website, this is a great way to do it, because the YouTube integration is incredibly important, and the folks at Google like to see subscribers. So if you subscribe to our channel, fantastic result for what we're doing here at Professor Messer. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, I want to do a lot more with Twitter, but every day I send out the A+ pop quiz of the day, and I've got little things I find all the time, so I like to stick some of those out on Twitter as well. And you happen to know when I do live streams as well on Google+, I make sure I copy all those things and have them on Google+. A number of you are already over there, and you've said, oh, I look at those on Google+ too, so I appreciate you doing that. There's also, of course, Facebook access, but of course, Facebook doesn't show you automatically every time I make a posting out there. Twitter's a much better way to do something like that. And there's a wiki out on the Professor Messer website. If you want to participate and perhaps put your own study notes out there, it's a wiki. You can edit and put your own information there so that other people can benefit from the things that you have learned. Of course, if that GTS Learning link, if you want to be able to look at those labs and try them out for free yourself, you can go to professormesser.com/netlabs, have those pieces there. And of course, I wouldn't be able to do it without all of you sending me your information, sending me the questions, pummeling me throughout the month in the chat rooms. The 24/7 chat room is at the bottom of the Professor Messer website. And I didn't put the link on here, but I put also on the Professor Messer website a 10% voucher discount for your CompTIA exams at professormesser.com/vouchers, which is also kind of nice. Nice to get a little benefit, a discount out for that. It expires at the end of this month, and I've already been told we've got a new one for next month. So we'll try to keep those vouchers going for as long as we can. Well, that ends up all of our topics for today. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next month on the Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group.